Good morning. My name is Claudia Marquez, and I'm Senior Manager of the Solution Design Team of the supply chain in DHL Mexico. The people who are joining, welcome to the DHL Transportation Forum 2020. And we invite you to stay connected. Remember that we have 3 days of events. This conference can be listened to 3 channels: Spanish, Portuguese, and English. Please select by clicking on the button you'd like to hear it, which is above the transmission. During this session, you will have the opportunity to ask questions through the chat, which is below the transmission. Please use this space only for asking questions and write the word question to identify them. You can consult the agenda, which is available in our website that you are seeing now on screen. We also invite you to share selfies, photos, comments, or experiences that can be very joyful for us. You can use the hashtag DHL 2020 that you are now seeing. This for you to follow the conversation. Well, let's start. The regulation panel, changes in tax regulation for transportation in Mexico. This panel is integrated by Jose Refugio Muñoz, Executive Vice President of the National Chamber of Freight Transport, Canacar. With this responsibility, he coordinates the work with everybody, and he represents this chamber before the 3 powers of the unions and in the International Coordination Chamber. He is Vice President of the Customs Commission and Trade Facilitation of the International Chamber of Commerce. He is also Vice President of Logistics Services of the Mexican Council of Energy. He is actively participating in the Cuarto de Junto in the TEMEC negotiations, and he is the President of Commissions in CONCAMIN. It's an honor to have you here today, Jose Refugio. Our second panelist is Ruben Hernandez, National Coordinator of Tax Issues of Canacar. He has more than 12 years of experience in fiscal tax issues of the freight transportation in the areas of control. During this time, he has actively participated in legislative ideas in the modification of the tax system. Thank you, Ruben, for being here with us today.
It is a pleasure.
Finally, as a moderator of the session, we have Alejandro Echever, Director of Transportation of DHL Supply Chain in Mexico. Alex, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Please, it's your turn.
Thank you, Claudia. Good morning to you all. Good morning to everybody who are with us in other countries, on Latin America and the rest of the world. Thank you for being with us in this transportation forum, and as every year, DHL is doing it this year to share with you. This time we'll be discussing about some of the changes in the taxation system in Mexico regarding logistics. This year, some new rules for taxation came into action, and with this, it gives tools to the SAT to minimize tax evasion. So let's talk about a little bit, Ruben, about these changes. Let's see what we're going to talk about. Yes, of course. Thank you for inviting me. Of course, taxation in Mexico, it is an issue that is constantly evolving. The reality is that public finances are a very relevant topic to the federal government, and in this sense, we have reinforced the measurements to avoid tax evasion during these years, and specifically in 2020, it is starting to build up a reform to the taxation system in the country, and it gives tools to the authorities to collect the taxes. The SAT, which is the system that is in charge of collecting taxes in our country, and the SAT has three three goals. The first one is to increase the collection. Second of all, to fight corruption. And third, to diminish the tax evasion and tax abuse. So, in this context and the need of our country in the SAT system to increase the collection of taxes, as you know, the the GDP, it is an indicator of the wealth of our country, and we also have an indicator to know what is the collection of in the country, which is only 16%, and compared with other countries, it is of course very low. And in this manner, the SAT has implemented some measurements which are now written in the law. And to go deep into these subjects, we have several tools. Some of them are new, some are not, but they they build up the scene and the picture of taxation in our country. So what we have is something that we call the reportable schemes, and also the CFDI system. And also we see that the reinforcement of the partners in a company, in case of companies, and also there is like a third party in this, a new figure, and we need to remember that Mexico it is part of an organization of local growth in the economics, and it has adapted to its legislation this third figure, third party, and also the reason of what is the reason behind the company. That is a new tool that allows the authority to characterize certain operations that taxpayers do, and if there is a benefit for taxation, if, for instance, they are reporting much less money when there is no evident reason for this. And of course, a very important tool is the issue of the inexistence of operations. We mentioned that UFOs and EDOs and EFOs, those are companies that make invoice for made up operations. They just simulate them and they do the invoice for them. So this point is very important because it affects all the all the taxpayers in the country. And I think we need to reinforce here this figure and also to talk about that what the legislation regarding taxing is in place. We also have two new concepts, which are contracts of a certain date and the materiality of operations. So we'll talk about these two subjects. And that's what I can say briefly regarding what has changed in taxation.
Thank you, Ruben. And I'd like to ask you, in this same context, to widen it up a little bit about these two famous articles, 69 and 69b, which are the base of these changes. Basically, these two articles, what tools are they giving it to this tax system? What tools to fight this tax evasion?
Well, Article 69b, it is not a new article. It comes from the reform in taxation of 2014, and what it says is that the inexistence of operations. This subject of inexisting operations is a very severe problem in our country. Unfortunately, there is a high level of tax evasion, and with this figure of presumption is how we will address the problem. What is in the article? It basically says that when will the authority presume something? When the authority notices or detects with all their tools, and now that we mentioned tools, we are talking about the, the data of the CFDI and the data on the taxpayer in their electronic record. So, with this information, when the authority notices that the taxpayer doesn't have the resources, the personnel, the infrastructure, or the material capacity to do the activities or maybe the selling of properties that are shown in these invoices, the authority can presume something. So that is what 69 Article B speaks about. In this, you state the lists, those famous lists of 69. It is a list of taxpayers with the name and the RFC, and it is presumed, or in a definitively manner, they are not able to withdraw this image that the authority made of them. So under this presumption that the authorities are real, the taxpayer must show that if they are in this list of Article 69, it is an obligation of the taxpayer to show that that presumption is false, so there is no punishment for them. And there's something that's not new also, but it basically says that the information, the information of the taxpayers, and there are exceptions on this information that they are for taxpayers. We see there is a list of taxpayers with tax credits, can have some kind of for taxing crimes, and we talked about the UFOs and FOs, and in here they make it clear who they are, who are not able to show, to demonstrate that their operations were actually existing. And it is important for transportation and logistics to know about this so they can know the reach of this kind of regulations. In some point it can build up to a crime, or also can get up to consequences of organized delinquency. It is.
Thank you very much, Ruben. Jose Refugio, most of our audience are transportation lines that work for DHL in the logistics system. And many of them are interested in what can these enterprises can do if this list appears, or in this article, that list that comes up to this article 69.
Well, Alex, I will not compete with Ruben in the technical matters of this subject. He is expert on this. But I would like to point out that our audience is not an expert, and I would like to show that these new regulations, I will just underline that because there's nothing new about this. Maybe the only thing new is the consequences that in these last times we have seen when you do something that you're not supposed to do. Because what is new in, for instance, that all natural persons and all companies are obliged to contribute to the expenses of the country? That obligation comes from the renaissance of the humanity itself, the dawn of humanity. So, what's new on that when we do something wrong, we need to receive punishment? There's nothing new about that. There's nothing new about the fact that since 2014, with the taxing reform, we could establish in the very taxation rules, the procedures, and the mechanisms to try to identify in an agile way, an efficient way, the things that were done incorrectly. And we all remember that one of the most important subjects in the reform of 2014 was the establishment of the so-called electronic invoice, and also the implementation of this tool of the electronic invoice that, by the way, this electronic system of control of all the taxing aspects is one of the most advanced in the world. Here in Canacar, as part of the International Road Transport Union in Geneva, we have been able in events of these international organizations practically to boast about the electronic system for taxing that we have in Mexico. And together with this taxing reform, practically we we build up the foundations of all the tools of what Ruben calls tax evasion. And what could be worse than when you make an invoice or make a document of an inexisting operation or presumable that to simulate an operation? What could be worse than that? What I think that it is important now is to see how the companies, those who give the service, for instance, us as transportation service and our users, mostly the big users as DHL, how can we find mechanisms or tools to avoid getting into this thing that Ruben mentioned of the ones who are delivering the service, this risk of being in a figure known as the EFOs, those companies who are making invoice of simulated operations, and in the other side, the users of the service, how can they reduce the risk of getting into this figure that we know of EDOs, companies that deduct operations which are simulated. So of course, all this comes from what Article 69b states as a presumption. This presumption is born when somebody who offers a service or a product doesn't have the infrastructure, nor the personnel, nor the equipment to guarantee that this product or service was actually performed. And it can also be a presumption of a simulated operation when the taxpayer who is offering or who is selling a product or service doesn't have, for instance,
And that's
an address.
interesting what you're saying, that this presumption is born from this lack of infrastructure, equipment, logistics, we can say, that enterprise can have. And then I have this doubt. What can a line transportation can do in order to, if it is included into this list of enterprises that presumable are supplying a service, I don't know if to use fictitious or fake, what can they do?
From this perspective, we have two options. The first one is corrective, and the second one is preventive. Of course, regarding the corrective part of it, the law and 69B article states a procedure for the EFO to the EDO to know about this presumption. They must be aware that they are in this list. So We have time frames for the EFOs, and they must be notified by the SAT, by the authority, that they are under this presumption, and if they cannot prove that that's wrong, they can be definitively in another list for those who couldn't prove something different. And when the authority states that, there's when the EDO problem comes. The company who used these invoices, who couldn't prove that it was a material operation in this invoice that we have, if they cannot prove, well, the consequences go to the EDO. And there is a there is something that the taxpayer must do to the authority, and they must prove. If they cannot prove the infrastructure, the personnel, the capacity, of course they wouldn't be able to do much. And the EFO will affect the EDO, and that's a problem. And another problem that we have is that there are EFOs who do fictional operations in a partial way. Let's say that the EDO can have perfect operations, perfectly real, with maybe a taxpayer who is in the EFO list of definitive, and at some point the authority will ask the EDO to prove that it was a material service, but the SAT will have a background that wasn't real. So this inexistence of operations will definitely have an economic impact for the EDO. For it can take you to an increased cost, to a VAT of the 30% and an ESR of 30%. We are talking about a 46% cost towards the EDO. So we need to make it clear to all taxpayers to check on this Article 69 to know the timeframes, because if you let the time frame go, we will be proving the presumption. So if the EDO or the EFO are not able to prove that they were material, there are two options: whether they pay or there is a crime of
Thank you,
tax
Ruben.
evasion.
I understand that in these articles there is a first presumption where you have the opportunity to these enterprises to show their operation within their lapse of time, and depending on these demonstrations, depending on what they show, it can follow into a tax evasion or not following these compromises, these tax compromises. Jose Refugio, you own a line transportation. Enterprises, when they offer a payment, they have a rentability that it should let them follow these compromises. But these enterprises who do not follow these regulations, why do you think they do it? Why do they not follow these tax regulations that they had previously?
Well, Alex, first of all, the two articles we're talking about, they practically don't talk about the tax evasion. They talk about simulated operations. What does this mean? An operation that it is presumed, well, that it was documented that it took place, but that in the real life it didn't exist. Those are the famous invoice makers, as they call them. It is a company whose business is to simulate operations. And we are not talking about tax evasion. We're talking about operations that were documented as if they were real, that the document was made for this operation, but that it was used and that it was used to the other part to deduct it as a credit. So we're not only talking about the one who's offering a service, but also for this process of simulated operations to take place, there must be somebody who sells it, who documents it, and somebody who buys it and who deducts it as a credit in their taxes. Of course, the origin of the lack of the failure is in the documentation that was created. That is what Ruben calls the company that it is making invoice for simulated operations, but it has a consequence in the EDO, which is the company who is deducting the simulated operations. So, if the company who is making an invoice for an operation that is presumed to be simulated, it doesn't affect that in fact the company sold that service or product. It is also responsibility for the person that deducted this and to show the materiality of the service. In the user end, historically, it has been just getting an invoice, the CFDI, electronic invoice, and it doesn't keep any other evidence that the service was actually performed, that it took place. We generally, or the client is generally good if they only get the invoice or the CFDI, which are the same. But in the light of this, that it is very complex, it is not enough just to have the backup of the CFDI or the invoice of the operation, but also it is required to complement that documentation with other evidences. So, in a certain point of time, whoever received that service or product can can also show that indeed the service was provided. So the 69B, Article 69B, establishes co-responsibility between the EFO and the EDO. And what is this all about, according to myself, is not only that what can you do when you're on the list? The procedures are very well established. When I am on the list, I have some time frame to prove this is not true. There is a procedure for this, but what is relevant is that what can we do, both parts, the one who gives the service and the one who buys the service, when to eliminate the risk. And let me say that in the market in which you and I are in, it is a very high risk sector, very high risk. 97.5% of transportation companies in Mexico are micro and small transportists. In a study, an analysis we did in Canacar several years ago, where we tried to quantify how much informal our sector is, we fell down. We were astonished. Almost 80% of the ones who were giving the service didn't have an address. And what are we seeing in 69D? We see the factor that we can presume an operated a simulator operation is that we don't have an address. That is an indicator. How many times have you verified as users that the one who is giving you the service you're buying does have an address?
Yeah, and I think that you're going there. It's how In this list, a lot of enterprises that are there in the list are the ones who provided a service, and today they are providing services of transportations, but even though they are there, and there the question is, and these enterprises that are there, independently if they have the opportunity to prove their operations, they have an impact. Let me say it commercial. If myself as a user, I see that one of these transportation line is there in that list, for me, it will be, let me say it, an alert, like a red light, as a user of these enterprises.
But why do you need to wait until you see it on the list? What we need to do is to prevent, to try to diminish the risk. So there is not that possibility because when we are on the list, then you need to prove. And 69B not only states what the company that is giving the service must do, the one on the list, but it also states also the one who bought this service and deducted. He will also be asked to prove that the service indeed was bought. So it is not enough now to have an invoice, even if it is electronic invoice. It doesn't matter if you have a letter, even though it is online. You need to have the evidence, you as users, that the service on top of the document that backed up that operation at some point, we need to have the additional evidence that prove that the service or the product was actually bought. So the risk exists for both parties. What what is important to point now is how can we reduce the risk?
And this is that every time and the users of these services, of these enterprises, have selective processes.
That's true.
But additionally, what this will make us do to these companies is to have processes much more complicated of control, and the ones who are using them today focus on the processing of the selection process, not only in the operation issue or the volume of the services or shipments, but also, let me say it, decision to select enterprises that have processes, operational processes, administrative operational processes in that allow us to be fine, to be
Exactly.
quiet. I think that this is something that these changes will take us. On the other hand, what can Canacar do in this sense? How can we support these transportation lines, these little mans, trucks that want to develop an enterprise, an operation of transportation within the regulations? How can we help them to do it right, and that so they can play in this game, to call it that way?
Ruben, I don't know if you want to comment something. Well, specifically about these preventive activities for transportation industries, as you said it, Alex, the topic of the administrative capacity is very important, and to reinforce inner control within the country, within the company, it is key. So they need to make it clear in their processes in the inside, and they need to change. They need to be reinforced communication lines and also verification of information of the providers, and all these needs to be reinforced. We were talking about which would be the consequences, and the consequences, as we can see, go from very little restriction, for instance, the use of the CFDI, so you cannot make invoices, but it can also build up to a crime. And in that case, you can have law enforcement get involved, and that is important. So it is important that law enforcement uh, goes after taxpayers, because there is a responsibility. Yes, there is. And whether it is a natural person or a person who represents a company, for instance, the commissar or administrator of a company, we're saying that if the operation, a simulated operation, goes beyond 7.8 million pesos, it has consequences as prison, and even up to be considered organized crime, get to be organized crime. So that is very, very severe. And here we have the safety of the company, whether if it is just a natural person or a company. And we think that these corrective measures that the authority states about these operations that were done in the past, well, many people have asked us, if somebody is in the list, will we clarify the present tax year, or what tax year needs to be proven? I can say that there is no clear disposition on that, that it is not like something that's prescribed. When can you say that it is an operation of our AFO or an EDO? We say that the time frame is over 5 years. So if somebody is in that list, what will happen is that we have 5 years going back in which the EDO needs to prove the operations. So whatever we do, whatever we do in the past, well, we need to correct that at some point in time. But what is from here onwards, it's fundamental.
Ruben Refugio Canacar has today a program or a course that can help these lines to mitigate avoiding this list or in this type of actions?
Well, in fact, part of the work we do in Canacara is, well, first of all, we think that vast majority of the companies in transport in Mexico are are in the range of the micro and small business. And this condition, of course, makes them vulnerable to the risks of not paying their taxes, you know. And part of our work as Canacar is to look for how, with the actions that we promote, we do first of all a level ground, so they can all compete. Of course, the transportation industry in Mexico is made of micro and small businesses, but how can we all together make a level ground for having the competition conditions which is fair among them, but also that they compete within the legal frame. So we have very important actions regarding capacitation, training, approaching to diminish the risks in which the businesses, small and micro, I insist, can reduce to the maximum those risks.
Thank you very much, Refugio. I'd like to open the panel for questions. As you know, we are connected, we are online in Latin America. We have a lot of people in Colombia, Peru, Chile, Brazil, in other countries, for example, the United Kingdom, Germany. I'd like to open the panel to receive questions from our auditorium. Can you please help us with that? Questions? Let's wait a moment until we get the questions. Well, definitely, Alex, this was a very successful panel because we have a lot of questions. Jorge Seguera from Mexico is asking us, how can these generators affect of these lines to not follow these regulations?
Well, we were talking about that during the panel, that one of the consequences is the costs, of course, and in other part, but costs not only regarding money, but also an administrative cost for how to clarify all these, and the lack of certainty that generates to do not prove this and go to some other kind of consequence. So it is important for the transportation companies to oblige to this Article 69 to prevent the connection between companies like these. And I think this is a very preventive measure to avoid these cases.
Thank you very much, Ruben. We have another question from Alejandro Rivera. Which are the measurements that these enterprises can take in order to avoid this repercussion, and how can this affect the transportation lines?
Well, measures to diminish the consequences. Small businesses, micro businesses, these two, their administrative capacity is less. Even though their capacity as a service can be good, they might have some problems in the administrative part of it. But we have seen with very good results some practices that transportation companies have developed. For instance, to institutionalize a compliance area that is very good. Compliance is seen as preventive in legal action, and this includes several areas, several regulations that are those that affect the company. And I think that little by little, the companies that do not have this figure yet in their scheme, they need to build that area, because if there was any legal action against us, when there is compliance work within the company, the national law enforcement authorities state that if the one that is accused can prove that there was somebody in charge in the company to look after and to check all the regulations, in this case taxation, and that the company did everything possible to avoid the consequence of a crime, we can say that the crime can be reduced in a 75%. So it is important for companies to build these administrative structures when they consider an official of compliance.
Thank you, Ruben. We have a third question from Gabriela Gaona. What can we do to decrease the informality in the services?
Well, let me say first of all that in freight transportation, it is one of the economic sectors with a very high risk of informality. And of course, this this affects all the quality and certainty of the services. I think that actions to fight informality have been being developed very successfully, and of course the part of electronic control and electronic invoice, I think that was a great leap forward, even though this hasn't been, or it hasn't eliminated 100% all these activities. But I think that the most important thing here is that about co-responsibility. Co-responsibility between the one who provides a service and also the one who buys the service. And regarding electronic invoices, it was a very big step in that direction, and I think that the mechanism to fight informality is co-responsibility. To really be co-responsible between the one who provides a service and the one who buys it. And I think that is totally typified and it is sanctioned not only here, not only to the one who provides it, but also the one who buys it. And it is not only the no deduction of the expense, but also can have a legal or penal consequence. So for everyone's sake, I think that we should be very co-responsible to fight informality that has harmed the economy of our country so bad.
Thank you very much, Refugio. We are going to the final of the panel, and I'd like to ask you, Refugio, as the representative of the Canacara and as owner of a transportation line in Mexico, what message can you give to our audience, to the transportation lines in this sense?
Well, first of all, I need to emphasize a lot that the quality of the service and the formality of the service are are not necessarily related to the size of the company. The sector in which we make our business in it's built up of micro and small companies. But this doesn't mean that the best for these micro and small businesses to operate in the edge of formality and outside of the legal frame. So that's why we have promoted schemes to group these small and micro companies. The figure that we call the integrating company, it is a figure that works very well to group these very small businesses, and so we can compete in the legal frame. If there is something that affects us very much, that is informality. And being informal, it is not a synonym of being small. Being informal is an attitude towards life. It is to be in favor of illegality. we need to promote within our country. And talking about transportation, we are small businesses in the vast majority, as I have stated, uh, with a figure that we have tried to promote with this integrating a company, a mechanism with which we can associate small businesses without losing their individuality. It is a figure that we've been promoting with a lot of effort. Informality and illegal is bad to everybody. We cannot bet on a service or an activity or in a country that is based on illegality. We need to contribute. We all need to contribute to operating legality, formality, and to be formal and to work within the legal frame. It is not a synonym of big companies. With these aggregation techniques, as we have done, we can link small with small, small with medium, and all together in a market in which the rules prevail. It is a market in which we all win.
Well, there's the message, the closing message. Thanks, Jose Refugio. Let's work in formality. Let's work in the good service, in providing a good service. Let's follow all the regulations and to reinforce our organizations, our inner controls, and let's avoid to be surprised. Jose Refugio, thank you very much. Ruben,
A
thank you as
pleasure.
well. It's been my honor, a pleasure to be here with you in this panel. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here everywhere that you are. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alex, and especially let's thank Jose Refugio Munoz and Ruben Hernandez, who represent Canacar, for their apportations in this topic. Now, our second conference is done. We thank you very much for watching, for staying with us, and we expect you in the next conferences. For the ones who can be with us, in half an hour, we will have another conference that you will enjoy a lot with Dr. Elizondo. Don't miss it.